This is very exciting. Hi, this is Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. On this episode, I talk with Phil Venables, who is the CISO with Google Cloud. Phil was originally scheduled to be on stage at S4X22, but unfortunately, he had a last-minute emergency, so we thought we'd bring him on the show. Yeah, so many things I could have talked to him. We had 30 minutes. We talked a lot about cloud and leadership. But I'm going to, in the show notes, I'm going to link to a number of his other articles that I found very interesting. Besides this interview, I just wanted to let you know that the S423, which is going to be February 14th through 16th, the call for presentations is open. I'm going to do a video and write an article on what we're looking for. It's not too different from last year, but we have a new stage 3 that we're going to try something different on, as we always seem to. But I'd encourage you to submit as soon as possible, because we review and accept them as they come in. So it's a lot easier to get accepted in June and July than it is in late August, right before the CFP closes. With that, here's my interview with Phil Venables of Google Cloud. Joining me on this episode of the Unsolicited Response Show is Phil Venables. Phil had a 21-year career at Goldman Sachs, both with as a CISO, worrying about security and also looking at some of the business concerns there. But in the last year and a half, he's joined Google Cloud as the CISO there. And I guess what got my attention wasn't so much your work career, but your writing. I would encourage people to follow Phil's writing at philvenables.com. He puts out, I think, some of the most interesting things, like the non-traditional sorts of things, new ideas, new ways of thinking. So I've enjoyed your writing for years, and I'm happy to have you on the show, Phil.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's great to be here.
Well, your articles gave me just a long list of areas I want to dive into. I know we have 30 minutes, so we'll just hit a few of them. But again, I'd encourage people to check those out, because we're just going to hit a sampling of the good stuff. And maybe we should start related to what you do in your job. So you're involved with Google Cloud. You're dealing with securing the cloud and securing the cloud use by your customers. In the ICS world, we have seen people use the cloud now for years. You know, cloud is kind of this term that isn't quite as accepted in the ICS world, but we've seen people use it for storing process data, for digital twins, for predictive maintenance, and things of that nature. And I've even seen a few cases where it's used for control, very limited control, but maybe, for example, when certain things happen, allowing certain settings to be set from the cloud. If you were to look at the ICS world, maybe 3 years down the road, do you see the ICS world expanding their use of the cloud, you know, just in terms of raw numbers or different ways? Or how do you think we'll use the cloud in the ICS world 3 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is it kind of depends on a few things. You know, it kind of also depends what you mean by cloud. So increasingly, cloud is not just this thing that's in the cloud. Most cloud providers, you know, including us, have kind of edge products and products that can be deployed on premise for a variety of reasons. And so I think it's going to be much more of a distributed use of cloud services. So you pointed out a few examples in the question where you could imagine a situation that's definitely used more, where you've got OT devices out in the field, whatever that might be, you know, whether it's in a variety of businesses or critical infrastructure, and they're in some cases managed locally, but constantly streaming data back to the cloud. In many cases, it could be mediated by like an edge deployment of a cloud edge product. So I think the future is going to be cloud services, but delivered more flexibly where customers need them, either in the cloud or as edge products connected to the cloud. And I think that's going to create a lot more options for, you know, OT type use cases than I think we typically see today or are just starting to see.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the edge, because that is a key part of it. How much processing and decision making you're making at the edge, what you're sending to the cloud and such. That's an area that a lot of people are playing with now, and they're even doing security at the edge now. With potentially, you could do some deep packet inspection, determining what sort of commands you allow in from the cloud or process from the edge. But I think one of the things that gets people nervous when we talk about cloud, whether you're talking about it in this hybrid model that you're talking about, or just pure server capacity and processing offsite, is control. How the idea that something non-local would be able to perform some or all of the control capabilities is what gives a lot of people pause in two senses. One, if it's not secured properly, that control could be abused, and you can have arguments whether it could be secured better in the cloud or whether we're doing a better job on-prem. We see in a lot of sectors and companies they're really not doing much on-prem, so maybe the cloud would be more secure. But then you also run into this issue of, well, what if the cloud isn't available? And I will tell you, in our sector, anytime we hear about these outages for 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever they are, that affect so many businesses, the knee-jerk reaction is, that's why you can't use this in ICS. How do you think that's going to change over time? Or do you think it's always going to be an issue where it can't be counted on to the level of need that a lot of ICS require?
Yeah, I mean, so first on the security question, let's get that out of the way. I think you're absolutely
Okay.
right. I mean, I think, cloud is now generally considered, I think correctly, as being more secure than pretty much most typical on-premise environments. I mean, just the extent of investment that's gone into cloud security, the default encryption, the hardened servers, the reliable and hardened software stack. There's a whole array of things that even the most seriously invested organizations on technology are not able to match the level of default security in the cloud, as long as the obvious caveat that it's configured and deployed correctly. And most cloud providers now, especially us, are doing a lot to assist customers to securely operate in the cloud as opposed to just use the secure cloud. But to your kind of reliability question,
Well, can we stop there just before you get on that? Just to push back a little bit, and I'm inclined to agree with you, but in the ICS world, we do tend to have a degree of limited use and isolation, and the isolation thing can be greatly overblown, but that isn't present in a typical corporate environment. For example, we don't do email. We typically don't allow these systems to access internet sites. And they're very special purpose, limited devices, and depending on the asset owner, they will limit who can gain access through the security perimeter. So they do have some advantages over the corporate world in terms of, I guess, securing them. We take advantage of. Do you think even with those advantages that today or in the near future the cloud would be more secure?
Well, I mean, first of all, in a lot of the ICS environments I've seen throughout my career in various contexts, I think that physical isolation is more claimed than reality. I mean, I think in many cases you see a lot of cases where organizations have failed to maintain that separation, where there's periodic connections from control rooms, there's other things. Admittedly, I know there's a lot of organizations focus heavily on that, but in many cases, the connectivity to OT environments in general across all industries, I don't think is as isolated as a lot of organizations believe it is to be. And you just see the incidents that have occurred that give testament to that. And again, not to diminish the fact that there's, some industries in some sectors and some companies that maintain very, very significant degrees of security in separating out critical infrastructure OT, from what might be considered a more kind of regular use case of operational technology. So, but I think the other thing to remember as well is, there's many kind of flavors of cloud. And so not all cloud has to be all internet connected. I mean, there's plenty of instances where you can do private cloud either as an edge deployment or private cloud either as a site-to-site connection to the cloud provider. And multiple layers of strong control to isolate that from other network infrastructure. And so, all the way through to things where customers can manage and absolutely control encryption keys so that even the cloud provider can't access certain things without direct involvement from an on-premise host security module that's managed by the customer. So I think that what I just said then was not available a few years ago, and it's certainly not available in all cloud providers. But for some cloud providers like us, there's a lot more options for customers to make use of cloud, either as an edge deployment or as a private configuration in a broader cloud environment, to get that degree of separation that's intended for security and compliance and other purposes. And I think this also helps, back to your question on the reliability aspect as well. Again, as you'll be aware, cloud is a reliable platform. Generally speaking, I think, as you pointed out, there have been some outages in a number of cloud providers to various different degrees of severity, but they're relatively unusual. And when you look at the reliability of other types of networks and the reliability of other types of software, I'd argue that cloud is more reliable than that. It's just easier to see when there's a cloud failure than when there's kind of transient failures in other types of infrastructure. But again, as you point out in the question, ultimately the degree of resilience you get from the cloud is how you build on the cloud. And so there are private connectivity, edge connectivity, multiple zones and regions, different ways of constructing services. You don't always have to have services always connected, so you can actually kind of have some degree of isolation periodically. So ultimately, the great thing about cloud now, as compared to a few years ago, is people have got a lot more options to use cloud as a set of tools to assemble that tooling in the way that delivers on the right resilience, reliability, and control plane separation goals. That I think enables people to take advantage of the cloud while still preserving and in some cases enhancing their reliability, resilience, and control goals.
Okay, and just to close the loop, when I was saying isolated, by no means do I mean air gapped. I just meant that the allowed communication could be restricted greatly to certain protocols between certain systems. I didn't want anyone to think we believe there's an air gap. I think that mystery has been solved.
But it's interesting as well that the so for example, in some of the things, it's becoming easier in cloud to do this. So when you think about a lot of environments, if you want to enforce that goal you've just described, which is essentially absolute least privilege connectivity of services, fully allow listed communications at a process to process level based on what you might describe as a zero trust environment. In other words, no implicit trust, everything's verified, everything's mutually authenticated, everything's default denied, subject to a protocol, all of that kind of stuff. That's traditionally been very, very difficult, expensive to implement, and hard to maintain, and hard to strike the right balance between the false positive or false negative of approved services that may give you an unintended reliability problem in the name of maintaining high degrees of control. The good news about all of that is more and more of that capability is baked into the cloud in a much more simple way. I mean, it's essentially what we would describe at the application level as a service mesh. And increasingly with tools like Istio and Envoy and many other tools that we've developed and open sourced and support, give organizations the ability to achieve those isolation and strong separation goals using easier to manage and maintain technologies that are more usable by application developers. And that's where effectively now, and especially in the future, service mesh technology is heading. And that may make those goals that you describe even more easily available to more organizations to implement that degree of separation control that they previously couldn't have done because of the complexity of achieving it.
Just two other quick things on the cloud, and then we'll move on. Have you seen one of the areas that I think there's a real possible win for is a lot of the high value sites, whether they be high value to the community or to the company itself, will have a backup control center. They'll have a primary control center and a backup control center. I would think one of the natural areas we should be seeing is one of those two moved off-prem, moved to the cloud. So if for example, you had something on site, boom, you spin up this thing that, again, you might have had isolated to some degree so that you couldn't get cross infection. Are you seeing much take up of that kind of split between on-prem, off-prem, primary backup?
Yeah, we see that quite a bit. We see a lot of organizations moving some, there's a range of things. So moving backups to the cloud to have an additional layer of resilience and recovery capability beyond traditional kind of on-premise resilience plus offsite backup tapes. That's an increased set of flexibility. To the point of your question, you see organizations that would have liked more separation between their primary and backup locations not being able to necessarily achieve that for economic reasons. Whereas now, because of the distributed spread of cloud and the fact that there's so many different geographically dispersed zones and regions, that you can build a much more distributed architecture more cost effectively, then all the way through to the fact that you can think about, even if you don't want to get rid of your on-premise, to your point, you can create the equivalent of multiple offsite backups in multiply even more geographically dispersed locations using different cloud regions. And we see a lot of organizations enhancing their resilience in that way. And, I think that's a natural progression.
And I could see that also just from the orchestration benefits that you can, spin one up if you need to almost immediately. So you could have like your primary in the cloud, some limited backup that allowed you to operate for hours or days on site. And then if the primary had any issue, you could just spin up another one somewhere else in the world. I know it's not quite as easy. That's kind of like saying it's only software, but at least it's a lot easier than building out a backup control center or a second primary control center on-prem.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, especially when people start using more modern IT architectures where their software and their configuration is more reproducible, they can easily spin up new cloud instances. And, to be fair, they can easily spin up more on-premise instances. Of course, with on-premise, you're limited by your hardware provisioning time, whereas in the cloud, you've almost got, the whole capacity of the cloud that you can burst into or spin up new things. And then in reverse, if an organization wants to be primarily cloud, but they also want some on-premise control interface equipment. We have, for example, I think Microsoft and Amazon have similar. We have a thing called Google Distributed Cloud, which is a local deployment of Google Cloud services that interconnect with your full cloud deployment, so you can operate in kind of edge and disconnected ways, but using the same software, using the same control, and that gives, again, options for different kind of, there may be different physical security requirements for on-premise. There may be different requirements for being able to operate in disconnected modes for periods of time, while still maintaining long-term synchronization and interoperability with a cloud deployment. So again, when you go back a few years, these options weren't available across any of the clouds. Now, all of the cloud providers, I think, in general, are adding more options to give that degree of flexibility so that customers can pick and choose the architectures that are optimized around their particular needs.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Now, the other area that is of interest is we have this problem, and you kind of addressed it with your early comments on the security of the cloud. We have this problem of many, many small critical infrastructure organizations, municipal water, small electric utilities, things of that nature that just claim, you can always decide where to spend your money, but claim not to have the resources to actually do a good job maintaining their systems, let alone securing them. And so we're starting to see the case where maybe not these small companies themselves, but some third-party provider, whether it be the ICS vendor itself or someone in the industry, actually says, we will provide this environment for you. We will actually do it. You can have operators interact with it, but you don't have to have anything on-prem to deal with this. You don't have to maintain it. You don't need to secure it. Do you have any large partners like that yet that are actually saying we are going to service small critical infrastructure vendors with support contracts, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few across the industry, and that's essentially getting to the point of what you're after is what we ultimately all want to have is an environment where you've got secure products, not just products that you have to secure after the fact by dropping in security products. And that same goes for services. And so a big part of what I think all of us are trying to achieve in partnership with specialist service and IT providers that specialize in particular industry verticals is how do we equip the organizations to have secure products and secure services that just operate like that out of the box, so they don't require special skills or maintenance to be able to create the right level of security. And I think, and again, a big part of cloud is really the economy of scale that occurs that enables that to happen. So, we can invest in a level of security in the product, whether it's encryption, whether it's the specialized security hardware we embed in the servers that we build, and a whole array of other things. While we invest a lot in that because we believe it's the right thing to do and security is vitally important, we also get to do that because we're able to amortize the cost of that over a large fleet. And so the economy of scale works in our favor because the scale means we can drive the unit cost of security down, whereas small environments or shrinking on-premise environments, the unit cost of security by definition is going up. And so there's an economic factor at play here. And embracing kind of partnerships with service providers that can provide a default level of security using the tooling that we provide to enable small organizations to tap into a higher level of security than they wouldn't be able to afford or skill up on their own is an absolute critical economic dynamic for how we see security going forward.
Yeah, and you have those economies at your level, and then at let's say if you were doing the water market, if someone was providing a water SCADA system or a water DCS system to 1,000 customers, they could just keep them all up to the same level and provide a consistent set of services. I'm really looking forward to seeing that because I think that's one of the real challenges. In fact, CISO has recognized that as well, is how you help these small, even if they're not supporting a large population, they are critical to a certain set of the population, how you get them up to the level they need to be. And this seems to be one way of doing it.
Yep, that's right.
Let's pivot here. We just have a few minutes left, but I want to hit this. You wrote so many articles. I want to hit the leadership one if we only have time for one. And so you had a quote in an article where you're talking about the muddle in the middle related to leadership and security. And your quote was, just because senior leadership in organizations won't do every single thing the security team wants, then that must mean leadership obviously doesn't care about security. The reality is, of course, more nuanced. And then you wrote, I've never seen any organization, irrespective of sector, geography, or scale, where leadership literally doesn't care about security. And I'm not going to argue with you on that, but I would tell you that there are many in the industry that would argue with that. Very frustrated security people that feel something is absolutely necessary and don't feel they get the support. What is that disconnect between the security community and the executives, since you say they both have kind of the same goal in some sense?
Well, it's interesting. So again, when I'm sure you've had this experience, and many of everybody listening today has had this experience. When you go talk to boards or you go talk to executives and you say, do you think security is important? Is it one of your top priorities? Every single person is going to say, absolutely, yes, it's my top priority. Mm-hmm. Now, the big question is, does that statement of priority translate into actual effect that improves the security of the organization? In some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't, in some cases it's kind of in between. And so when you look at the reasons for that, there are many, many different reasons. Sometimes the organization says it wants more security, but when presented with the bill for that, it maybe doesn't actually have the appetite to do that. Maybe, look, if we're honest, maybe the security team is not presenting a sufficiently commercial mm-hmm. case and an argued case for the specific security spend that's needed. Maybe they don't have an actual security problem. Maybe they have an IT modernization problem. And in the first instance, they'd be better off investing in upgrading all their technology such that it can be better secured and better defended later. And if you spent the money on security first, you don't get to do the IT upgrade, which harms security in the long run. So the security team might not be happy, but the right decision might be to invest in upgrading and modernizing all the technology. There's many, many different reasons, and it's like they say, kind of, every organization has its own kind of special case of its problems. The one thing, I kind of referenced in the article is the muddle in the middle is often what you get is management allocating funding, executive leadership, the top of the organization, demonstrating great tone at the top and saying, we're going to do this, we're funding this.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the bottom of the organization, you get this kind of buzz at the bottom of people, IT engineers and security engineers, really excited about doing security. It's kind of a cool thing to work on. And in the middle, you get this kind of muddle in the middle of middle management. And that's not a criticism of middle management, because just kind of what happens is you think about there's a certain layer in all organizations, large, medium, and small, where individual kind of middle managers have got to translate the corporate objectives to do like grow revenue, integrate acquisitions, improve safety, drive up compliance, reduce security risk. There's 500 other things they have to do, and they don't have infinite resources to do all of that, and they have to prioritize all of that. And I think what I was trying to say in the article is security leaders and security teams, we all need to do a better job of helping those line of business managers, those line of business IT managers, those infrastructure managers, all of the other people that sit at that level that have to translate all of the corporate objectives into some kind of priority order. We got to help them figure out that priority order. And in some cases, it might be doing more work in the security team to integrate security into IT products so that the business managers or the IT managers can do less work in integrating security. It's just coming for free as part of all the frameworks and tooling they use, back to our previous conversation. So I think, the real tone of this is no matter what the tone at the top is, security might not still progress unless security teams figure out a way of helping all of the environment figure out a way of making the secure path the easiest path.
What do you do with a case where the security team has identified something that is good practice, but in fact, there isn't a business case that will have a marked reduction in risk? Because I think that's where we get a lot of times security teams come and say, this is what we should do. This is why, this is what it accomplishes. But at the end of the day, they either isn't a reduction of risk or they're not making the case. They're unable to make the case that it will reduce risk.
Right. Well, look, it's hard to talk about these things without talking about specifics. But, if there is a case where there's some industry supposed best practice that in a particular environment doesn't actually reduce risk, then maybe management are right to say, why should we do that? I give you a classic kind of trivial example is like, if you go back 5 years, the industry best practice and commonly accepted wisdom is that you change your passwords every 90 days. Yep. Now people realize, some people did at the time, but now people realize that that's just kind of like a waste of effort if you do certain other things. And certainly now it's all kind of, pointless anyway, because we really should be on stronger forms of authentication rather than passwords. But I think, it's okay, I think, for management of companies to expect the security teams to be able to articulate not just the risk reduction benefits, but also other adjacent benefits in terms of efficiencies, control performance improvements, reliability improvements. And I think, what I see as the mark of great security teams is how they engage with leadership in business and technology and how they deliver those adjacent benefits, not just the risk reduction. And if they can't articulate what those benefits are, then, maybe they need to just sorry to say, work a little bit harder on figuring out what those benefits are. But I'm not trivializing how hard this is. But, most of these critical jobs, whether they're in security or other places, are actually pretty hard and require that kind of effort. But ultimately, the right path forward is generally where we see in our customers successful security teams. They have great partnerships with the businesses and the technology groups. In other words, it's not an adversarial relationship. It's a team relationship to deliver not just security, but agility and reliability and other risk reduction. And the security teams, very much a peer of the business and the technology groups to deliver on a collective mission. And that's the ultimate sign of success. Where there's conflict and inappropriate tension, that's where you see these disconnects that drive poor security performance.
Well, that's a show. I want to thank Phil Venables, CISO of Google Cloud, for coming on for the interview. I cannot encourage you enough to check out his writing at philvenables.com. In the show notes, I'm going to link to 3 or 4 of the articles that I think are very pertinent to the ICS community. But Phil brings a unique viewpoint. I don't know where he gets it from, but he brings new ideas that make me think in almost every article. Remember, the S423 call for presentations is open now through the end of August. You can find those out information at s4xevents.com/CFP. And again, I'll include that in the show notes. That's all for now, and I'll talk to you next time. Something warrants an unsolicited response.